I'm so close to being finished with this series on epistemology that I decided to record another video on the same day. Won't post it. Well, I don't know when I'm going to post it because I had to take my computer to the Apple store today because the keyboard, I hate those butterfly keys. I got to get my keyboard fixed because there's some keys on there that are getting stuck. So I don't know when I'm going to get it back. Okay, so I did something different this time since this is going to try to be the last post on epistemology. I made a list of things that I want to talk about so that hopefully I won't forget. The first thing is that if you followed closely the last few videos on epistemology, you should be able to see that most of the epistemological tools that we have do not give us certainty. Certainty is kind of an elusive thing. A lot of people would like to have certainty, but there's only a handful of things that I have absolute 100% certainty about. And I'm talking about, to be honest with you, I don't know the difference between the word epistemic and epistemological. If you know the difference between those two words, leave me a comment. But there's only a handful of things that I have epistemological certainty about. I'm certain of the items of knowledge that I have by virtue of my first person immediate access to my first person awareness. I have absolute certainty about a handful of necessary truths like the laws of logic, geometry, math, things like that. But even in that case, I don't have absolute certainty about every necessary truth. And the reason for that is because it's more obvious to me that some things are necessary than it is that other things are necessary. For example, it's more obvious to me that the interior angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees than it is that the Pythagorean theorem is true. They're both equally necessary. But anyway, beyond those things, everything else, has some measure of uncertainty or whatever, and that's okay. And that includes Christianity. I kind of envy Christians who claim to be certain. I'm a little bit skeptical when I run into a Christian who says he's absolute 100% certain. I suspect a lot of Christians say that they have that kind of certainty because they think it's impious somehow to claim to have doubts or whatever. But it seems to me that doubt is just a regular part of being a human being. I mean, even when I get in my car, I have doubts about whether I'm going to make it to my destination without getting killed. But certainty is not only elusive, but it's also unnecessary. I mean, we get through life fine without certainty. Now, I guess when it comes to whether you're going to commit yourself to a religion like Christianity or not, you want to be as close to certainty as you can be. But suppose somebody's like 51%. I was on the internet earlier today, back when I had a computer, and somebody was saying that he doesn't think that having like 51% confidence in Christianity was enough to warrant being a Christian, that you have to have something a lot higher than that, not necessarily absolute certainty, but something pretty high. I'm not sure I agree with that, because between the ages of about 22 and 25, I was about 50 or 51% sure about Christianity. I used to call myself agnostic back then, but I didn't give up Christianity. I decided back then that I would kind of hang on to it or keep practicing it or keep living as if Christianity were true until I found out one way or the other, because I figured it might be true, and if I find out that it's true later on, I don't want it to be a situation where I had given up on Jesus or something. And besides that, there were times when I kind of wanted to give up Christianity, but I couldn't bring myself to say, definitely there is no God, or Jesus is not the Messiah, or something like that. I just couldn't bring myself to say that or to think it out loud or anything like that. But at the same time, I was agnostic in the sense that it seemed to me that whether it was true or not was not something that I could know. and that up until then I had just kind of taken it for granted because I had never been given any reason to doubt it. And so I eventually became a Christian because of apologetics. But I'm not going to go into detail about that. But basically, it seems to me that there's a difference between having an intellectual assent, believing in something, and putting your faith in somebody. To put your faith in somebody is to trust them to do something for you. And you can, and so putting your faith in something is a matter of the will. You can choose to trust somebody. So like I trusted the people at the iStore today to take care of my computer. I don't really know for certain that they can fix my keyboard, but I nevertheless entrusted my computer to them. Trust in the Christian sense, or faith in the Christian sense, includes, some measure of belief. You can't you'd have to believe it somewhat. But it's not mere belief, and it's definitely not blind belief, which is a lot of people mistakenly think. But it also includes trusting. So you always put your faith in a person, Jesus. You're trusting him for your salvation. But it also includes loyalty, faithfulness. That's why, even the English word faith and faithfulness are related in the same way that pistis in the Greek is. I think faith was a pretty good translation back in the day, back when faith meant what Christians actually mean by faith. It's changed its meaning over the time. Now people take it to mean belief in things you have no reason to think are true, which was never what faith in the Christian sense meant. But anywho, so it seems to me that as long as you have some measure of belief in Jesus, then you can choose to trust in him, even if you have a lot of doubts. After all, Jesus said that you can move mountains with the faith of a mustard seed. A mustard seed. So, that sounds like he's saying that even with a small amount of faith, you can still get where you need to go, or whatever. So, I don't see that you need to have anything near certainty before you can make a decision to follow Christ. So let's see. So another thing that I wanted to talk about was you might get the impression from all the videos that I've made so far that we're just kind of logic machines, that we have all these tools to acquire knowledge and we just kind of do it automatically, and we weigh the true from the false, and if we see it, we believe it. If we don't see it, we don't believe it, that sort of thing. And that may especially be the case when I was talking about noetic structures, because I was talking about how, we all strive to have a consistent noetic structure. In other words, to have, when you put all of your beliefs in a box, you want to make sure that there are no beliefs that contradict any other beliefs. You want the whole system to be consistent. And so if you're confronted with new information and you have to accommodate that new information, you still want to smooth everything out to where there's no contradiction. And so you might have to adjust some of the beliefs that you have, change your beliefs about a few things in order to accommodate that new belief, or you might just reject that belief altogether because it's so incongruent with what you already believe. But that makes it sound like it's all kind of mechanical, but I don't think people are really like that. In reality, our biases and our preferences and our emotional attachments seem to have a big effect on what we ultimately believe. And I've thought a lot about that, because what's kind of paradoxical about that to me is the fact that I don't think that we actually choose what we believe. And you can kind of test this out. Take anything that you believe, that you honestly think is true, and try right now to change your mind about it, to believe that it's false. Like, I believe that I'm sitting in a parking lot. I couldn't just by sheer force of will choose to believe that I'm not in a parking lot. And so I don't think that in general our beliefs are under the direct control of the will. I do think that we have indirect control over our beliefs, though. We can I can choose to consider somebody's argument. I can choose to look at a piece of evidence. I can choose to read a book. I can choose to be fair-minded and looking both sides at something. There's all kinds of choices that I can make that can result in my belief changing. If I choose to carefully consider another person's point of view or look at some evidence or something, doing that can cause my beliefs to change, but I don't think I directly choose it. So it seems to me that if our desires play a role in forming our beliefs, then it must be the case that they do so in this indirect way. So for example, if you're a Christian and you want to hold on to that belief, you can do that by surrounding yourselves with other Christians. You know, when you're around other people who repeat the same thing over and over again, it becomes easier for you to believe it. Or if you just read literature that's friendly to Christianity, it becomes easier to hold on to that belief than if you just read a lot of literature that criticizes Christianity. And even when you read stuff, I think we all have this tendency that when we read something that we know is going to oppose what we're going to say, we don't read it openly in such a way as to acquire information. We're not reading it with that goal in mind. We're reading it cautiously, thinking, all right, I got to make sure I can refute this. You know, how am I going to refute that or whatever? And when you read stuff with that kind of attitude, you tend to not read it as carefully. And when you don't read it as carefully, it ends up not having as big of an impact on your belief. So there are all kinds of ways, I think, that our biases and our preferences can impact our beliefs. So there has to be some way that we can kind of I don't think that we can just rid ourselves of emotional attachments. And this is not just true of Christians either. It's true of atheists. It's true of anybody who defends a point of view or engages in argument or debate. Because a lot of people will get attached to their point of view for no other reason than the fact that they were in a debate. If you're in a debate, your ego is at stake, and you're a little emotionally attached to your ego. So if somebody challenges something that you say, you automatically want to defend it because you don't want to appear foolish or stupid or something like that. And so when you engage in debate, you can sometimes get emotionally attached to the point of view that you're defending. And so paradoxically, sometimes you can become more convinced of your point of view just by engaging in debate about it. And I always try to keep that in mind when I'm debating somebody about something. If I actually want to change their mind, I understand that the more I press them, the more I challenge them, sometimes the more they will dig their heels in and the more convinced they'll become of their point of view, merely because I'm challenging it, which is it's kind of ironic. But it's true, I think. And so sometimes what I'll do is if I start getting the impression that the other person is blowing smoke, that they're resorting to absurdities in order to avoid the force of my argument, I'll just back off. And this has happened a number of times. A lot of times the debates that I get into go back to epistemology. Like somebody will tell me, well, I'm not going to believe in God unless I have physical proof. I have to see him with my own eyes or something like that. And so I'll challenge their epistemology and I'll say, well, you can't see other minds. You only have access to your own mind. You can only perceive your own perceptions. So how do you know that there are other minds or something like that? I actually had this discussion with somebody a while back, and he, instead of conceding what I thought was a pretty modest point, he said, well, I guess I don't know that there are other minds. He was willing to embrace solipsism or pretend to embrace solipsism rather than concede my point. And people do this all the time. They'll give you any kind of absurdity in order to avoid the force of your argument. So I tend to back off if I sense somebody is doing that, because I don't want to cause them to dig in their heels and embrace some absurdity just to save face. So how can we avoid doing that ourselves? How can we avoid embracing absurdities, stuff like that? Well, it's natural. I mean, I don't think we can get rid of our biases, and I don't think we can get rid of this feeling that we need to protect our ego or something. Or if we can, it's very hard to do. So I think maybe a better strategy is, for one, there's a few things I think you can do. One is to be totally honest with yourself at all times about what you actually believe and why you actually believe that. And this attitude of honesty about what I believe is kind of what helped me get out of a lot of epistemological quagmires that I had as a teenager. As a teenager, I pretended to have doubts about all kinds of things: the external world, other minds, morality, all these things, because they couldn't be proved. Now I realize there's some things that just don't need to be proved. I just have to be honest with myself about what I actually believe and why I actually believe it. Sometimes I'm not really sure why I believe things. If I just honestly reflect, I find myself believing. But if you are honest with yourself about what you believe and why you believe it, you'll actually do better in debates. Because if you try to defend a point of view with a BS argument that you yourself don't even embrace, really, you don't really think it's a good argument, then you're going to end up getting embarrassed. But if you're totally honest about why you believe something, then use that, because it's going to seem to you're going to have more confidence, because it's going to seem to you that it makes sense. Otherwise, you wouldn't believe it if that's the real reason that you believe it. And so I guess honesty is the one thing. The other thing is just to nurture a love for the truth. You should have this desire to want to know the truth, whether it's convenient or not, whether you like it or not, or whatever. That should be your goal. Pursue truth and follow the evidence where it leads in any situation. And that's easier said than done. Another one, I guess, is just be aware of what your biases are. And just by being aware of what your biases are, I think sometimes you can sense when your biases are having their way with you. Okay, so let's see what else we got here. Okay. So another thing I want to talk about is no matter what worldview you adopt, there's always going to be difficulties with it. If you're a physicalist, for example, you're going to have to deal with the problem of consciousness. Consciousness is kind of hard to resolve on physicalism. If you're a dualist, you're going to have the interaction problem. It's kind of hard to figure out, how does the soul interact? How does something that's non-physical interact with something that's physical? If you're an idealist, you have to deal with just the counterintuitive nuttiness of claiming that none of this is real, that it's all in your head. So no matter what worldview you subscribe to, there's always going to be a snag. This is even true in physics. You've got quantum mechanics on the one hand, and you've got general relativity on the other hand. And if you push these things to their extreme, they don't cohere. There are contradictions. Like, for example, in general relativity predicts a singularity in black holes and at the beginning of the universe. But quantum mechanics, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle says, well, you can't have a situation where you can have a subatomic entity can have a specific, there's a sun, can have a specific location and momentum at the same time. But if things converge to these really small Planck length type things, then it would have both a momentum and a location at the same time, which violates the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So something's got to give, and there's a handful of other reasons why the two things are not consistent. So even if you're a physicist and you adopt, the standard physics point of view on things, there's still going to be difficulties. So almost no matter what point of view, any religion that you subscribe to, or if you subscribe to atheism or whatever, there's going to be questions you're not going to be able to answer. So the thing to do is to weigh all the evidence against a point of view, against all the evidence for the point of view, and incline your belief to the weight of your case. Now that means that you don't have to answer every objection to your point of view before you're rational in holding on to your point of view. And so with Christianity, there are arguments against Christianity that I admit I don't have a good answer for. Why is it that it's not more obvious that God answers prayers, for example? That's one of the biggies for me. Jesus made all kinds of lofty claims about the efficacy of prayer. He's, for example, who among you, if your son asked for a fish or a piece of bread, would give him a stone? I mean, Jesus makes it sound like God's going to come through for you. But, if you're just honest with yourself and you look at reality, people die, all kinds of horrible things happen in spite of people praying earnestly to God. And so it doesn't seem like God answers prayers to the same degree that you expect he would, given what Jesus said about prayer. To me, that's one of the biggest obstacles to believing in Christianity, and I don't have a good answer for it. The New Testament does give several qualifications about prayer. You have to pray according to God's will. You can't pray with selfish motives. You obviously can't pray for a hooker, or pray for somebody to get killed or something like that. You can't pray for sinful things like that. So there's all kinds of qualifications, but even with those qualifications, to me, it's still a problem. And so what I do, though, is I look at the case for Christianity, all my reasons for believing Christianity, and I look at these arguments on the other side, and I just simply weigh them. And for me, Christianity seemed more likely to be true than false, given everything that I know. And I think that's what you have to do no matter what worldview you subscribe to. So even if I give you an argument in this series for Christianity that you don't have the answer to, that doesn't obligate you to convert to Christianity, because, maybe you've got some other argument against Christianity. So basically the point is, though, is that you don't have to have every question answered before you're reasonable in changing your point of view about something, or before you're willing to embrace a point of view. I believe that general relativity is a pretty accurate picture of reality, even though there are extreme circumstances in which it couldn't apply. Okay, let's see. Yeah, that's it for that. Recap. So I guess the last thing I want to say is that we're all fallible. We're all going to have at least some false beliefs. I think as long as we're fallible people, that's kind of unavoidable. But we shouldn't despair about that. All we should do is use the tools that we have, all of our epistemological tools, to the best of our ability to come up with the most reasonable, honest beliefs that we can. And that's it. And we should all cut each other some slack. We're all kind of in this together, if you think about it, because we're all live in the same reality. We're all kind of basically wired the same. And we all have to we all have the same tools, the same epistemological tools. And so we all kind of want to know the truth. And the way I see it is we're not enemies. We're not, even though there are all these different competing ideas that are all vying for our assent, we're kind of on the same side in the sense that we'd all like to find out which ones are true and which ones are false. And I think that if we just have this attitude of looking at it as if we're on the same side in our search for truth, rather than looking at each other as opponents, that maybe collectively we can all do a better job of it. Instead of demonizing each other for believing the wrong things, we should work with each other. We should want to reason with each other. You tell me what you know, and I'll tell you what I know, and maybe we can help each other come closer to the truth. That should be our goal. Or that's my vision for the condition of mankind, that we all kind of look at it like we're all in this together. And that is it for epistemology.